you guys are going to have like perfect timing.
Okay, thank you. This is my entire talk. So now you know what I'm going to say. It's not too much, I hope. This is about the problem. This is about the plant. This is about the weevils. And this is about a hopeful solution. So I start with the problem. Pine weevils are a natural inhabitant of the forests, and they eat many things. Among them, they eat the bark of spruce seedlings that are planted on clear cuttings. And this causes death if the damage is severe. And many million plants are planted every year. In all of Europe, it's more than 1 billion seedlings planted every year. And 40% of these seedlings are protected by insecticides. And if they were not protected, then the costs would amount to something like 140 million euros every year. So this is a big problem. The seedlings that are planted come from forest nurseries, so they have to grow millions a year, as you understand. And there are several ways of preventing the damage to the plants in the field. In Norway, the current insecticide that is used is a neonicotinoid, and this is one of the insecticides that are banned in Europe in the future because of the bee death problem. And but lately, mechanical protection methods have been developed, especially in Sweden, and they include wax, covering the lower stem with wax, which is the method I'm working with. That is coming from a Norwegian company. And then there's a layer of sand on the outside of the stem. You can use a different method, including something like latex or paper cover, or even nets around the entire plant. Further, there's a recommendation of using soil preparation before planting, because if there's a patch of mineral soil around the seedling, then that will reduce the feeding on the bark. And also, if you leave some of the mature trees when you cut the trees, then the twigs in the top of the tree will act as food source also for the pine weevils, and that can also reduce the pressure on the seedlings. You can also remove stubs, but that's very lot of work, costs a lot. You can remove the weevils. People have stopped trying to do that, as far as I know. And you can delay planting, but then you may have problems with all the grass and bushes coming up when you, in the end, plant the seedlings. So this is a bit about the seedlings. This spruce seedling is protected with wax, and it has been growing for 6 weeks. So new roots have emerged from the root ball, and you can see the bright shoots coming out from the buds. And since the pine weevils are eating the bark, I'm interested in the flow of carbohydrates in the phloem. So the green parts produce carbohydrates, feeding the roots for root growth and for root functioning in nutrient uptake and mycorrhiza. And the roots feed the upper parts with mineral nutrients and water. And if we cut a stem, the phloem is located in the outer part of the stem and the xylem in the inner part. So when the pine weevils eat this part, then we have problems of feeding the root with carbohydrates. Yeah, so, and when the root don't get carbohydrates, then the root will die, and then in the end the shoot will also die. If the pine weevils would be so kind just to eat along a strip in the vertical orientation, then the then the spruce seedlings would actually survive, because then there will be possibilities of transporting the carbohydrates to the root anyway. So I did some experiments removing strips on both sides, and the trees didn't even lose growth potential. So they have good possibility of enduring that. But if the pine weevils eat around the bark, then all the phloem flow is cut off, and that's detrimental. So I took one of my pine weevils into my office. I collected about 600 pine weevils in June, and I tried to teach it some plant ecology, but it wasn't interested. What they are interested in is the lovely smell of stubs. So from these stubs, they emit the lovely smell of alpha-pinene and ethanol in combination. And this attracts both the males and the females. So they gather here for mating. And the eggs are laid around the stub close to the roots. So the larvae feed on the roots below the stubs. So after 1 year, you can find fat, lovely larvae like this. And I'll show you. This is from a Swedish webpage, very useful for me, since I'm a plant physiologist. I need to learn about these pine weevils. So this is 1 year, spring, summer, autumn, and this is the first year after the cutting of the trees. So the pine weevils come flying in great numbers, and they mate and they lay eggs. That next year the larvae are developed to adult pine weevils, and they are depicted here as yellow. So this is to show you that the second autumn after the cutting of the forest, that's the time when the number of pine weevils is the highest. So that's when the need of protection is also the highest. So when you protect a seedling that you plant out here, you need the protection to last for 2 years. So what we want to achieve is for the spruce seedlings and the pine weevils to live separate lives. And the wax method consists of a layer of a layer of wax on the lower part covering the stem. So after the pine weevils have entered the site and started mating, they stop flying. So they just walk around. And when they walk past here, the hope is that they don't recognize this as a seedling, so they will just walk past. For all alternatives to insecticides, we need them to be environmentally friendly And we need them to have a low cost per seedling, and the method should be easy to implement in the forest nursery. And of course, the method should increase the seedling survival rates. That's very important. And the seedlings should still grow satisfactorily, and the method should be efficient for 2 years. Okay. So the wax protection is mechanical, and if the wax is sufficiently thick in the beginning, then it can be a protective layer for 2 years. So the wax is plastic, which means that when the spruce stem increases in diameter, then the wax layer gets thinner. So it's more like chewing gum, less like elastic. So it doesn't constrain the stem, but it does become thinner. And then further, it's consistent of hydrocarbons, so it's biodegradable. And we have checked that, and it degrades slower than beeswax, but that's a good thing because we want it to last for 2 years. And then we have worked in a EU project developing a machine that's now in operation in Biri plantskole. And in that project we studied the wax-plant interactions. And we found that the wax is not toxic to the seedlings, and we could cover up to 60% of the seedling height and still have good growth for the seedlings. And the thickness didn't matter to the plants, but we had to emphasize for all the users that the wax needed to be cooled with water after application, because when it's applied to the plant, it's 80 degrees, very hot, so it's very important to cool the plant immediately. And if you don't, you actually get this problem with the phloem dying, so that's very important. So if you do everything correctly, then you have a healthy plant growing in the forest. And we have just show you results from one field test. I'm sorry, this is in Norwegian, so I tried putting in some English words here. So we compared plants without any protection, plants with the insecticide protection, and plants with wax. And this is the percentage of plants in the categories at the end of the first season. So the wax-treated plants, there were more than 95% of the plants were unharmed or nearly unharmed from pine weevils. And whereas for the untreated plants, more than 80% were actually killed by pine weevils. So this was a place and a season with a lot of pine weevils. And the next autumn, there should be even more pine weevils. And at that time, we had more than 40% unharmed or nearly unharmed seedlings. And only 4 or 5% were killed by pine weevils. So, yeah, I think this method works very well. And but when there's a very, very high pressure of pine weevils, some of them do climb above the wax and eat the plant above. So our next step is to add a repellent compound into the wax to avoid the climbing, and that's where we do choice experiments. We lock up 2 plants inside a box with 3 pine weevils for 6 days. And then we have one with normal wax and one with wax with repellent inside. And we calculate the anti-feeding index of the repellent. And this is just to show you one repellent. And we were very happy to see that it had more than 50% repellency the first test. But then when we left the repellent in the wax for 6 to 9 weeks, then it actually acted as an attractant. And then after 6 months, there were no effect. So my conclusion is this is work in progress. And yeah, thank you very much.